Snizhana Shevchenko, who is an independent researcher and consultant at the Analytical Center Jurfem and a mentee of our BHR Mentorship Program under supervision of Dr. Nadia Bernas. Our next speaker is Anna Tsuvina, who is Erasmus Mundus scholars at Barcelona Institute of International Studies and also a mentee of our BHR Mentorship Program under the supervision of Sofía del Valle. Anna will join a bit soon after a very important meeting for her. And we will have today two discussants for our presenters, who is Sofía del Valle Trivelli, Engagement Manager for Social Transformation at World Benchmarking Alliance. And our second discussant is Olena Uvarova, who is Research Coordinator at Law Group Wageningen University and Chair of the International Business and Human Rights at National Law University in Ukraine. So we will have the following program. Firstly, Snizhana will present on Ukraine's workforce gap, how can war sparse women's economic inclusion, with Olena Uvarova as a discussant. Then Anna Tsuvina will present on assessing gender equality in Ukrainian companies and analyzing using gender benchmark methodology, with Sofía del Valle as a discussant. Each presenter will have 15 minutes to present their studies, and then we will have 10 minutes discussion with each discussant and proceed with an open discussion with an audience. So everyone who is today participating is welcome to share your questions or reflection or comments in the chat or during the open discussions. And I think Snizhana can start. The floor is yours, Snizhana.
Thank you, Tamara. Let me share my screen. I sent request to share my screen. Okay. Please let me know if you see my presentation. You do, right?
Yes, we see it, but not on the screen. Yes, but just in the PowerPoint.
Now you see it.
Yeah, we see it, but in the PowerPoint, not in the sharing slides mode.
And now?
Yes, great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, my name is Snizhana Shevchenko, and I will be putting the topic of Ukraine's workforce gap. How can war spurs women's economic inclusion? So, without any further hesitation, let's move on. As a matter of fact, in many countries, and Ukraine actually is no exception here, women have narrow economic opportunities and employment opportunities in the labor market for various reasons. Among them, the main are that in most countries, women are primarily responsible for caring for the family, and the second thing is, of course, gender pay gap, which usually pushes family households to prioritize men's career over women. In Ukraine, gender pay gap is a little bit more than 18% as of now. I must admit that 6 years ago it was 7% higher, so there was a drop down here. And last year, Ukrainian government adopted a national strategy on gender pay gap, but still all this effort does not comply with average gender pay gap in EU, which is 13%. All of this, primarily these two factors and many others, of course, led to higher participation rates of men in high-income sectors of economy, and it created a situation of overrepresentation of different gender groups in some sectors of economy. So asymmetric impact of involvement of different genders in it. And before the full-scale war, it was really hard to create a business case and to push it for business like for businesses for approval on voluntary basis on involvement of gender diverse workforce, and as a matter of fact, there was no pressing need for them to consider this seriously. The Russian war, as any war, of course, had numerous and still has numerous negative repercussions on everyday life and on different spheres of our life, and the labor market is no exception as well here. Of course, war creates fragile setting for human rights. By its essence, of course, it disrupts existing societal norms and business operation for worse by making more visible existing inequalities, deepening a social crisis, and it leads to higher rates of unemployment and precarious, setting condition and stage for precarious working conditions. Also, it can further entrench some unjust societal norms, such as marginalization of women, people with disabilities, etc. As of 2024, the level of unemployment in Ukraine concludes approximately 14%, and at the beginning of 2022, it was 18%. So there is a drop, but a reason for this is not quite positive one. And here we are at this point where the current labor shortages actually push Ukraine as a state and Ukrainian business to seriously consider of including under-engaged groups of society. And women is one of the group in the focus. According to International Labour Organization, since 2022, approximately 2.5 million of jobs were lost, and it's 15% drop down, and nearly 1,006,000 Ukrainian people of working age left the country. Also, it was mentioning that almost 16% of internally displaced persons are as well women. So it's what we face now. It's not only challenges connected to the lack of human capital in the country due to going from the country, but as well creating some chaos in different regions due to having this internally displaced person, and women often also are facing different multidimensional discrimination with accessing to labor market. So when we are talking about the impact of war on labor market and the push for seriously considering of engagement of underrepresented groups, we see that the main reasons are, of course, immigration. According to the studies, as of 2024, more than 5 million people are abroad, mostly women, but men as well. So there is labor shortages. Also, ongoing mobilization puts its effect, especially on the male-dominated fields where there is no gender balance, which makes it impossible to cover the gap with male applicants for job. Also, the state of economic recession, decrease in household income, and in many cases, loss of main breadwinner pushes and setting the stage for women to also for the need for them to assess the labor market and balance it with household, taking care of the child. And talking about internally displaced women, we may say that the additional pressure is putting by the lack of childcare facilities generally. So what we see now, that we have this asymmetric impact on labor market. So the lack of male applicants for these high income sectors of economy, but as well there is a lack of human capital in the spheres where women were dominating, like education, healthcare, etc. And we are in the state where different stakeholders have some pressing needs. For instance, businesses feels the lack of human capital that put at risk their business operation, and they need, like, on the short term to cover this gap in human capital. State that faces as well economic recession and feels the need to engage people in work, and women as a people feel like the drop down in the household increase and feeling the need to find the way to balance their work and family life. By 2032, it is expected, according to International Labour Organization as well, as the need to engage almost 9 million of new workers. And of course, having this number in mind, the Ukrainian government have to think beforehand of the strategy of who will be these people who will be involved in the labor market. Also, as I mentioned, so as of now, the strategy is not only to think about the post-war state and strategies of getting back people who fled from the country, like getting back refugees, but as well to think about those people who are already in country, but are under-engaged due to different reasons. And women are the main, like, group to consider. According to the studies, it is expected that the ratio of women in labor market will increase for almost 20%. We see that 40%, more than 40% was the ratio of women in labor market in 2021. Unfortunately, there is no statistics after the full-scale war. There is some statistics on women engagement in private entrepreneurship, but here I must admit like that according to the official data in 2023, every second private entrepreneur was registered by women, and now, like, women concludes more than half of private entrepreneurs overall. But in, like, many studies shows that increasing of percentage of people engaged in private entrepreneurship doesn't constitute a good thing necessarily, let's say, because of course being self-employed, it contains less social protection and security, and taking into consideration that like Ukrainian legislation on self-employment is not quite in compliance with a key community of European Union on this in this regard. So it is also, like, the point that should be carefully considered. What does this number and increase constitute? And because sometimes private entrepreneurship in countries of low income or countries in crisis, for instance, war or some fragile setting for human rights, it means, like, private entrepreneurship is like a last resort to make a living for people. So having all of this in mind, there is a need to for Ukrainian government and private actors to think how to engage more women into the labor market and create them opportunities to do so. So giving this, like, short-term practical aim and, like, long-term goal that we will discuss in a few slides. So here we have this special situation where there is like a space for dialogue between state and non-state actors. So we see that there is some political will from state to boost this engagement, and there is like business buy-in to do so, because they feel this lack of human capital, which impacts their business operations. Also, we see that like in real time, we see this that some sectors of economy, which were really homogeneous. So it's quite risky to have this gender unbalanced sectors of economy, because in on a short notice it is impossible to provide and to have this quality engagement on short notice of people who have some even courses like training and reskilling programs. And inclusion of women into new roles, it requires investment in training and reskilling, and we have here, of course, the problem of limited resources and dependency on foreign investment. But as well, so it's not only about providing these opportunities for women to reskill, but also it is, of course, related to wider problem of having this social biases and preconception. So it's not only external thing, but also internal. That's why we will talk in the next slide about informational campaigns who motivates women to try some things that it's not quite generally perceived as a women thing. So here we may see some of the, I guess, good examples of programs that were created. Like the first three, for instance, this is the projects that are related to training and reskilling that aimed to involve women into the transportation sphere. So it's like having a profession of truck drivers, public bus drivers, wheel loaders, excavator operations, passenger transportation, and different specialized construction equipment. What I must admit here, on the previous slide, we talked about millions of new workers, but this program are rather small. So it's not about 10,000s of people who have a possibility to undergo through this program, but it's rather hundreds of people. So it's relatively small impact, but still it is something that have never happened before. And it creates opportunity for people who want to master this new role. There are also some examples of information campaigns. For instance, of course, you can. It's about engaging and motivating people to change and to fight their even own biases. And this particular program was also aimed to motivate business to join women empowerment principles. As of now, it is 44 companies that sign this principle. It means that they have this voluntary, they take this voluntary obligations to promote women empowerment and engage them in the sectors of economy. So there are different companies and informational technology and some mining related. So there are different businesses who sign these principles. Also, there are some programs to boost private entrepreneurship. For instance, program Own Your Business, which provided a starting capital for women to start their small businesses. And of course, there are some other examples of training projects like study vouchers from State Employment Service. Since 2022, more than 21,000 people used these vouchers, and 75% from these people were women. So it's vouchers for training and reskilling. And there are some private initiatives like Project Foundation. It was aimed to train, to help women to master and enter creative spheres and information and technology spheres. So it was the project that launched on during full-scale war, and it was focused on internally displaced women. Now it's closed, but it's still ongoing, but the sessions should be paid by donation. So here we see like some projects, and for instance, like this reskilling Ukraine Oshidrais. In this project, there is partnership between some businesses, NGOs, and state in different perspectives. So we see in this project like different forms of cooperation between different stakeholders. What is important here to notice, of course, like the latest like executive order from President Trump, for instance, who stopped support of USAID, which impacted some of this project. For instance, this Aleph Stroy School of Construction Equipment Operators, this is a project that fully relied on USAID support. So here we as well have some kind of lessons learned. Of course, we do have this like limited resources, but relying only on like one stakeholder following or don't seeking for building this capacity to move this project further, it can impact and end them rather drastically. So this is kind of something to think about. So summing it up, what we see so far. So we see the examples of meaningful stakeholder engagement and cooperation, which like wasn't so prominent before, because as I mentioned, there was no pending need, and actually the fact that no one from like no state, neither state nor business cannot handle this problem on their own due to like limited resources, time, money. So they need to cooperate in order like to boost at least something and to cover this short-term goal of like not stopping business operations. And of course, the other point is like we have this ongoing process of adapting our legislation with acquis communautaire of European Union. But of course, this legislative changes should be backed up as well by good business conduct and implementing by businesses best practices. For instance, like this signing women empowerment principles is a great example of it. So because it helps businesses to build this human capital capacity for a long term. And like last point with which I want to finalize my presentation is like I mentioned that war disrupts like any relationship for worse, and it's true. And here we have this pending need, and I won't say like this is a good opportunity, but we have this situation where there is a willingness, right, to engage under-engaged group of society in women. And what is important to understand, like there is examples where like this short-term need to cover workforce gap is done by businesses, but we need to keep in mind like what will be done in a long term, because it's about like at the end it's about like building this workforce capacity, ensure decent work. So it's not something like an opportunity to put even further human rights at hazard, and to foster this sustainable change in Ukraine during war and of course post-war labor market recovery. Thank you for your attention. Let's discuss your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Snizhana, for such an interesting presentation. And I think we can move to Olena's reflection on your presentation and research. Olena, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Snizhana, and thank you very much, Tamara. First of all, thank you very much for compelling and timely presentation on such critical issue, and for the idea of this research and for the idea of this presentation. It's very, very useful and timely, and you did a great job. And first of all, I want to emphasize that the presentation, on my view, effectively highlights the harsh paradox, because from one side, we see how the war increases vulnerabilities, and at the same time, it creates this urgent necessity and and as you called it, opportunity for transformative change in women's economic roles. And yeah, you discovered this paradox and this situation very well. And the argument that you are working on is well supported by data points. You illustrate in very good way was the pre-existing inequalities, pre-existing problems which we had before the war, and you illustrate the impact of the full-scale invasion on the labor market, and this is also a very strong side of your research and your presentation. And I like very much this connection that you make between this short-term need and demand and long-term goals. And it's really important and very nice that you see this connection, and you see the challenge how to build this bridge between what need we have now and what should be our long-term goal. As a discussion points, I would like to mention 3 points. The first one, for me, despite the fact that you mentioned this women empowerment principles, decent work, human capital, for me there is still lack of attention to risk-based approach, I would say, especially in the situation of the war and post-war recovery. Of course, we know yes, that in general and in Ukraine in particular, companies, there is still a huge lack of human rights due diligence practices, and of course companies which are involved in this kind of initiatives. These initiatives, of course, they are trying to solve, first of all, economic problems, right? For the national economy, for business practices. But, let's be honest, companies also are trying to use this like nice PR for them, right? And it's not, so without any, negative assessments of this, but still we need to ask question if this kind of initiatives incorporate human rights-based approach, if they incorporate human rights due diligence, if companies are able to identify human rights risks in this situation. And I believe that this kind of initiatives still have some additional human rights risks. We are talking about women who are working in male dominated fields and in situation of the war. And I believe that at least we need to raise the question, is the risk of gender-based violence high in this situation? For me, it's the first question which should be asked in all these kind of initiatives. And these initiatives might be much more sustainable and responsible if companies in parallel will be trained in human rights due diligence. I'm not sure if it's an issue in these initiatives, because still women in power principles are not about human rights due diligence. Also the second point for me, that it's not a question probably for the discussion, but it's like in long-term perspective, we need also to take in mind that we will have somehow the request to balance different needs, especially after the war, because these fields, as you mentioned, were male dominated, and Ukrainian companies need to build their capacities to be inclusive and to be inclusive for people with disabilities, for people who will return after spending 3 or more years on front lines, and how to balance, this request to have more balanced job market with the request to basically to employ mostly men who will return after the war ends. And so I'm trying to say that we need much more holistic approach, not just to be focused on gender equality, and it's a very positive development that we have this reconsideration of labor market, but how to build this holistic system which will also respond to other challenges, not just and the last one, those barriers for women to be, that you mentioned in your presentation, to be represented in some sectors which were relevant before the war. Now these barriers are still relevant or even more topical. Child care, access, right? Family responsibilities. Women are not represented in some sectors, also because they have this double or triple family responsibilities. And now when we have older family members which need care, we have people with disabilities, we have mental health issues. Again, this holistic approach again is needed, because without solving this kind of issues, we will have just this very limited scope of initiatives. As you mentioned, that all these initiatives, they have very limited scope of number of women who are participating there, because for scaling up these initiatives, we need to solve these structural barriers which were relevant before the war and which are very much relevant now. And this is my comments. But in general, I know that it's not your research focus, and but probably just to frame it a little bit more broader.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olena, for such an insightful reflection. And Snizhana, did you want to briefly reflect?
Yeah, I want to reflect back for sure. Olena, thank you for these comments. And one point that stuck with me the most is actually about this due deal on human rights, while integrating women to some fields. When we have our podcast that we prepared with this Reskill project, actually what is interesting, like your point about risks of gender-based violence, for instance, like we see that there are many programs aimed to integrate women into the transportation sphere. But for instance, this type of work, like working with shifts, etc. So there are no like facilities, for instance, like for men and for women, like where to sleep, where to shower, with like where to live. So they live all together. And actually, like feedback from women who already stepped in this profession after the training. So there is like some major like factors that actually after mastering this profession are like some risk factors for them, because they don't have this like let's say institutional support, like from the perspective of like, you know, facilities to support to be engaged in this sector of economy. And of course, this like really valid point with childcare facilities, which is still a major problem, like on regional and on like really like small cities level, it's more prominent. So so it's a major issue, and I do agree with you on this holistic approach, because like there will be different groups of society and have to balance. This is like the really important issues and questions that we need to ask ourselves now, how to balance all of these questions and issues. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Snizhana. We also have questions in the chat, and I also have a question, but we, I think, need to reserve them to the later stage and give the floor and space to present to Anna Tsuvina. Anna, you can start. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. You hear me, right?
Yes.
So first of all, I would like to apologize for the background noise. Unfortunately, that's a bit out of my control, but I will try to be as precise as possible and briefly present my research. 1 second, I'll share my slides. You should see them, right?
Yes.
I do hope so. Yeah. Yes, thank you. So the topic of my research is assessing gender equality in Ukrainian companies and analysis using gender benchmark methodology. The main research focus of this study is, or better to say, the main research question of this study is how to gender equality practices in Ukrainian companies across different sectors align with the WBA, World Benchmark Alliance's gender benchmark, in particular a subset of gender assessment, and what recommendations can be made to improve these practices. So there are 3 key objectives of this study. The first one is to assess gender equality performance in Ukrainian companies using this benchmark methodology. Another one is to compare gender equality practices between different sectors in Ukraine. I will elaborate on that further, which sectors. And the last one, to offer recommendations to improve gender equality strategies within these sectors. So as for the significance of this study, I highlight 2 of them. The first one is the scientific one, and the second one is the practical one. As for the scientific contribution, it would be the first application of the WBA gender benchmark, in particular gender assessment, in the Ukrainian context. And this study would provide new insights into how Ukrainian firms manage gender equality in response to their unique socio-economic environment. And for the practical contribution, we have a better understanding of sector-specific challenges in Ukraine, and also opportunities in gender equality, and also recommendations to Ukrainian companies for enhancing their gender equality policies. As for the research methodology, so this study uses the WBA gender benchmark, as I said, gender assessment. It's a particular part of this gender benchmark methodology, a subset, which covers 5 key categories. The first one is governance and strategy. Then we have representation, compensation and benefits, health and well-being, violence and harassment. And the approach of this research is quantitative analysis based on scoring the indicators. The indicators, like the scoring, is the final stage of the whole research, which is made after evaluating the company's performances, let's say, or policies. And in this presentation today, preliminary findings will be presented, but the results are not yet final. So here on the slide, you may see a screenshot of the 2026 methodology. I would like to demonstrate you how which elements, for example, are included in the gender assessment in comparison to the broader gender benchmark. You may see it here with the dots. So in the gender assessment, not all of the gender benchmark indicators are included. This was done to narrow down the focus of this specific research. For the sample selection and data collection, so for this study, we have 9 Ukrainian companies across three major sectors, in particular energy, agriculture, transportation, and logistics. And there were 3 selection criteria for these sectors. The first one, the size of these companies, then also industry relevance and data availability, which is very important in the Ukrainian context. I'm sorry for the noise. For the data sources, we have publicly available company reports, websites, and documents. This is the approach of the gender methodology, because only the officially published documents may be used for this kind of study. For this research, 2 adjustments were made. So the first one is that documents both in English and Ukrainian were used. Mostly in English, but in some cases also in Ukrainian, to gather more information on the policies. And also the time frame was adjusted for this study, because for this study we have 8 years instead of a narrower period, a shorter period of time. Also, I would like to mention that the companies involved in this study, they were anonymized to ensure neutrality. And also for the language considerations, I have already mentioned that. So the English documents were prioritized for the consistency and accuracy of this study. As for the preliminary findings and insights, I would like to start with the general trends, let's say, in Ukraine. Many Ukrainian companies publicly commit to gender equality, but concrete implementation remains very, very limited, unfortunately, which is, for example, evident in the fact that standalone gender policies are very rare. Normally, most of the gender equality provisions are integrated in the CSR and ethics codes, and they are, as I've said, very narrow in their focus. Then also there is a clear lack of clear time-bound targets and also minimal public reporting, and both hinder the accountability and progress tracking. The result is that the transparency is weak, with limited disclosure of gender disaggregated data, for example, for salaries, promotions, variance resolution, etc. As for the challenges, as it was also mentioned partially in the previous presentation by Snizhana, war-related disruptions continue to shift workplace dynamics, and they stall gender initiatives, unfortunately. As for the sectors, energy, agriculture, and transportations, they actually demonstrate broadly similar approaches to gender equality, though energy lacks slightly informal policy adoption, but just slightly, I would say. And also inconsistent data availability complicates cross-sector comparison and evidence-based policy development, which is a huge, I would say, obstacle in the research progress in the Ukrainian context. And for the opportunities, I highlight 2 of them. The first one is that adoption of dedicated specific gender policy with enforcement mechanisms could enhance internal accountability, of course. And another one is that improving transparency through public reporting on gender metrics could foster trust and promote best practices among the sectors selected. As for the next steps of this research, further data analysis will refine the findings, of course, and provide more detailed sector-specific insights. And the final recommendations for the companies will be presented in the final research. I thank you for your attention and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Anna, for an interesting presentation. It's really greatly connected with the previous, presented research of Snizhana, and really unpacks how different approaches towards measuring gender equality, targeting in business activities in Ukraine may serve for a more holistic, and more systemic approach to foster gender equality. And we will be really grateful for Sofia's reflection on Anna's presentation. Sofia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tamara, and thank you, Anna, for presenting. This is really exciting to see how it's moving forward. Maybe what I'm going to do first is take a few steps back and give everyone a little bit of like, what are benchmarks and why we do benchmarks? And yeah, kind of, I think I live and breathe benchmarks because I have been working in WBA for like 5 years. But I think for most people, this is like, okay, what's the point of all of this, right? So maybe to share a little bit where this comes from, benchmarks are basically a measure where we compare companies against each other, against common standards and common indicators. And the idea really is because companies themselves, of course, always choose how they report what they're doing. And it's really hard to understand whether a really beautiful glossy report a company may put forward is actually meeting human rights standards, is meeting kind of what's actually good practice in gender equality, unless you're able to compare them with each other, which is where WBA was born, to really provide a little bit of a common methodology and a common understanding of what companies are doing. We have been creating these benchmarks on human rights and gender, but also on other topics like climate, like nature, like others. So if you want to go to our website, there's so much, honestly. There's methodologies and data on all of these different topics. But one of the shortcomings we have as a global organization is that we only have a kind of more like high-level global perspective, right? So we're in our side assessing 2,000 of the most influential companies in the world that allow us to have a little bit of a state of play of how the private sector in general may be doing on these topics, but it really doesn't tell a story of how the private sector is doing in specific countries or regions in the world, which is where the work of people like Anna is so important, because really that's where it gets interesting, right? Like, as you're saying, kind of in particular in the case of Ukraine, with the context of the war, like the whole specific of like how is gender being incorporated in the private sector and businesses is a different conversation that you may be having at a global level. And having data on how companies are doing is really helpful to inform that conversation. WBA is not able to do it, but Anna is. And I think that's really great to see and kind of to be able to, I think there's also so many good linkages that both your studies could have, right? Understanding what the context is and understanding how ready or not ready the private sector is to kind of promote gender equality and the respect for human rights with the current policies and processes they have, and really inform then conversations to businesses themselves, but also to policymakers. So yeah, that's kind of like also why we do global benchmarks, but we also partner with academics and civil society organizations around the world. So they do more national level studies. One more thing to say is, I know, Anna, you mentioned kind of some of the main kind of objectives here is to, for example, help companies improve and understand what they can do. I would suggest that maybe you can be a little bit more ambitious, and maybe you can actually partner with as well with Snizhana and kind of see whether you can speak together also to the policymakers space and to kind of wider conversations about how do we use the opportunity that we have that there's more women coming into the labor force, how do we manage risks, how do we make sure that this is sustainable, and kind of what is needed there in terms of policy, in terms of incentives, in terms of highlighting good practice. So I think, and maybe it can be not just as a kind of or incentivizing companies to do better, but maybe to get everyone on the same page of the risks of the opportunities of the current situation, which is also kind of very unprecedented. The other comment I was going to do is, I know, Anna, that this is early stages, so that's why the trends are general. I have found from my own experience that the beauty a lot is in the numbers. So the moment you are able to put a number on something, so when you have all of the companies assessed and you can say, 50% or only 1 out of the 9, that really stays in people's minds. And then that's a stat you can work with. Of course, you have less companies than we have on our number, but still having the trends showcasing kind of which sectors may have more or less of this, and then contrasting those numbers with the ones we have at the global level is also really interesting. We have also found that companies like to be shown as, like, oh, this is the only one that has a leading practice on that, and the competition hates it, right? Like the competition is like, what? They got named as doing something good and we didn't. That actually does a lot to drive change. So basically, kind of highlighting the lack of transparency and highlighting who's doing well, that really does create some change. So you assessing companies is not neutral in the sense, it's neutral in the sense of you're not trying to take the side of the companies, but it's not a neutral action, right? The moment you start assessing companies, if you write an article about this, you're also putting something into the world that may change those companies. And I think there's a lot of power in that, that you could also use. How do I present this in a way that hopefully incentivizes people to want to do better instead of scare them into, oops, okay, you know what, let's never publish anything else ever again. So maybe my invitation would be when you kind of start writing more like the analysis and then the pieces, like pick up the numbers, but also think a little bit of what do you want this to create and to incentivize, and who can you maybe work with? So that's a more powerful article, a more powerful piece that can really drive change. That's also pretty coming from the place I am, which I'm less of an academic, I'm more like a advocacy and kind of engagement person, but I think that's the beauty of research that's actually oriented to action. I think those are the main points I had, but if anyone has any more questions about benchmarks or things, I'm gonna actually put the link in the chat to our previous gender benchmark, which is the global one we did, that also has a link to a methodology. So if you wanna have a look a little bit about kind of what the data says about global companies, that's really also helpful to understand what can be done when we're doing these assessments at more like national level too. So, Tamara, you beat me to it. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, I've just shared the benchmark methodology in the current state, so everyone can check how does it look and what indicators and spheres of assessment the benchmark proposes. It's really interesting framework. We also now researching its implications with Olena and Nadia within my PhD research and how it can provide a new implications for gender-related issues within corporate assessments during wartime. How it can be expanded, for both policy makers and policy practitioners. So it's really interesting study and methodology. Proposed. We have questions. We can open a discussion now, and everyone is very welcome to raise a question here or in the chat regarding our two brilliant presentations. And we already have several questions in the chat. And the first one is from Katrina regarding democratic processes, and several other questions regarding different initiatives. Katrina, do you want to ask it, or should I?
Maybe you could voice them shorter in respect to time.
Okay. So I suppose these questions were related to Snizhana's presentation, and the first was regarding democratic problems. Yes, so how these processes and midterm consequences of gender inclusion within corporate assessments can be affected, as mentioned, by democratic challenges for different states. And there were several other questions regarding initiatives, whether there are any initiatives to make daycare available for an early stage, or workers with family responsibilities, or to liberalize provision on duration of parental leave in conjunctions. So quite practical developments to ensure gender equality within business activities. And also another part of the question was still about the problem of rule of law and democracy inclusivity. So have, like Katerina mentions, have Swiss ladies in power as soon as they got parental responsibilities, how they affected by existing structural inequalities or demography issues. So Snizhana, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, I'm sure that I would be able to provide like a really precise answers, but let me try to do my best. I can definitely comment that as of now, I haven't seen studies on the impact of demographic problems on labor market, etc. But on the other side, I have read some studies on like connection with like decrease in demographic in Ukraine related to the liberalization of immigration policy, meaning not only considering strategies to repatriate back refugees, but as well to encourage relocation of people from different countries into Ukraine to cover these labor market shortages. So this is the first point. And regarding like this daycare initiatives, as far as I know, Ukraine is in progress of implementation of this EU directive on work-life balance. So it's not quite implemented, but it is in the process of it. According to this October reports of European Commissions on approximation of Ukrainian legislation towards to the European one, like this field of labor relationships and social protection. So we haven't done much progress there in 2024. So there are many like directives on employment, social protections that should be implemented. And as far as I know, there are like Ministry of Social Protection are working on it. But this work and family balance. So there are no systematic like programs and like the initiatives that I was showing on my presentation. So this like point of wasn't included in it. I know that there are some companies, for instance, in informational technology fields, they do provide for their employees like this some incentives to pay for daycare, like private things. So, but as you can imagine, it's really like one of a kind situation. So it's not quite popular. So here with daycare, we face like major struggles, I must say. And I've read some study regarding sewing industry. So there were pre-war, full-scale war, there were many women in sewing industry. And with the full-scale war, there were many courses for women to master this profession. And I read the study that many women passed like the course, but afterwards wasn't able to join like some factory because this shift work didn't allow them to take care of children, because even like if they go to public like child kindergarten, so it wasn't enough time for them like to do their shift. And that's why many women like passed these courses and then went like to some kind of private entrepreneur thing, like with the sewing, for instance, on Instagram, like not being engaged officially employed with some factory who actually trained them in order to engage. And the feedback like on this situation was that the businesses need to consider like firms to like support women, like to find ways to balance the need to take care of a child. So this is like really good question, and it is relevant even for like women-dominated spheres. So and major barriers are faced here. That's why I guess full-time employment is a challenge for women. Yeah, I guess that's it on my side.
Thank you, Snizhana. And we also had a question about cases of gender washing in Ukrainian companies, whether maybe Snizhana or Anna are aware of that examples. But I think actually what you just, Snizhana, mentioned, yes, of these courses and possibility of women to go to these courses and not followed by practical reality to be able to apply the new skills in the workplace, which forced women to go to self-entrepreneur format of work than to apply for some factories. It's partly answers to that question, but maybe you have some additional examples. Snizhana, please.
I guess this is something that maybe Anna will say. So the lack of accountability, actually, it's like there are some initiatives and it's hard to track like what are the results of that initiatives. And here we can like challenge like what are the final goal of this initiative, because if we do have good results, like it is nice to share. If you don't, so it's nothing to share. And in many cases, there are some like, I know, promotion or something that is going to happen, but that we cannot track the progress. And that's make me think that maybe this is the cases of gender washing, because we don't have like this really material results that we are like achieved like as a fact.
Thank you. Yeah, I also find it interesting in regard to all this reporting requirements, yes, that were established and adopted within European Union, for instance, but also they focus on due diligence process and yes, self-reporting of companies. But it would be interesting whether it's possible to expand these requirements also for companies, just to report transparently on all initiatives they claim they integrated in the reality, but how did it work out for reality? It's like usually is not covered in their reports. Okay, does anyone has the question to ask, to raise? Following the presentations. I still have several questions if I can use my floor of a moderator, both to Snizhana and Anna. So my questions to Snizhana concern several points you mentioned in your presentation. And the first one is that you mentioned that there is kind of homogeneous yes, gender roles distribution within some spheres of Ukrainian economy. It's just interesting for me. Can you elaborate on which spheres you find really homogeneous and not being able to adapt sufficiently to integrating more women in the workforce mentioned? And the other question regarding your presentation came to my mind about this fragmentation of these policies, yes, which you mentioned. So there are some policies to integrate women or to provide more opportunities for them in the Ukrainian work market, but still I do not see, and also in my studies, I do not see this overall comprehensive approach which was mentioned by Olena. And do you see the possibility, maybe in theory or in practice, for state to intervene and demand to provide additional funding for everyone, like to include this in really comprehensive national law requiring companies to create more opportunities for women, or it will be too much for our reality and there is not enough cost? So how do you see it from a practical perspective? Because of course we argue that on the theoretical level, but it's interesting to hear the opinion of practitioners. And I also have several questions to Anna, and the first one is to your methodology. So when you approaching the company's reports and different documents consisting gender equality dimension, do you go through the whole benchmark indicators? Like there is, yes, 6 spheres and around 31 indicators regarding gender equality issues within companies' practices. So do you go one by one, or you just make an overall assessment of that reports? And the second question slightly touches upon Sofia's reflection about the possible expansion also of states' role in that assessment. So is there any room for the state to intervene or create policies also requiring businesses to use that indicator system in their corporate assessment, or it's more voluntary based vision of business activities? Yeah, it's all from my side. Yeah, I see. Do you want to respond, or maybe we also take a question from Katerina and then you respond?
Let's respond because it can be too much questions.
Okay, so yeah.
Remember.
Yeah.
So regarding the first question regarding some sectors of economy being homogeneous, I guess in some way it reflects like so it's not something that is like Ukraine specific, like it's like world trends, right? But there are different level of this balances and proportions. So sometimes it's really out of hand. It's really visible, like 90% of people who are working there are male or female. So we are talking not about like having 50-50 for each sector, but of course having like maybe 30 to 70, I don't know. So something which will not put at risk the functioning of the sector of economy in situation like we have now. For women, it's like traditionally it's said that women-dominated spheres are education, meaning like primary school. So it's not about being manager at university or something like that, but actually teacher, practitioner at different levels, and healthcare. So it's about as well this first level of support, so being a nurse, etc. So mostly women are engaged in these spheres. As I mentioned, I guess that it reflects many countries' experiences, but we see that in situation in crisis, this becomes more like dangerous because it puts at risk operating of, for instance, even if I guess full-scale war began, right, and many women went outside of Ukraine because of war for some period of time. So there were as well these disruptions of services being provided by women because they need to take care of like child and like move to Poland or somewhere, right? And so this is the things when you cannot have this backup on short notice. And like male-dominated spheres, of course, it's like transportation in Ukraine, like mining, some like industries, especially in eastern regions of Ukraine, like mining industry, etc. So it, of course, related to like physical work, but not necessarily because there are these programs of like women mastering being of operator of some machines. So it's not about only physical skills, but it derives also from our preconceptions of what male-female work should be. And regarding the second point, I guess like from my perspective, like a challenge here is that of course, we do not have limited resources. We have limited resources and we don't have like money and time. We're time bound here with like even tackling these short-term programs. But what I see as a challenge that we cannot like dream big in this situation that we are. Of course, we need to have this like real goals that we may achieve, but still some kind of system and focus should be nice. So it would be nice if like state like have a list of some sectors of economies that should be prioritized, and we need to work more holistically within this sphere of in terms of people engagement and providing some equal opportunities and upskilling, reskilling programs. So I guess if we like not to like make a really like our best like hopes for this, but maybe have this fragmented dream that we're trying to achieve in some sphere. So maybe there is a hope for some kind of systematic approach, because now, as I mentioned, it's kind of it derives more from, as I see it, from some kind of external investors like some, for instance, Sweden Institute or Canadian Institute, and they are interested in some field and they want to support transportation or something else, and they, or agriculture sector, right? And they are investing in it, but there is no like rational thinking, like how to connect all the dots. And that is the problem, because it doesn't give this, you know, we don't have this like quantitative change that can be translated into quality change. So we don't have enough people engaged in it to make an impact.
Thank you so much. And it's also visible that we can also not rely on that programs, as you said, because once undemocratic or like radical government comes to the power, they can just cut all the financing for this program. So yeah, indeed there is a need to revision the state's role in that operations. And also it's really sadly but insightful, yes, that pre-existing structural distribution roles between genders and gender inequalities even exacerbate when the war comes in play. As you mentioned, Snizhana, that women who were providing a lot of services and care services in Ukraine, when they flew Ukraine at the beginning of full-scale invasion, there was no one to replace them, the same as with men-led spheres of economy. That is really challenging for Ukrainian society now. And Anna, would you like to elaborate?
Yes, for my question, so I would love to answer the first one. As for the list of indicators, so the short answer is yes, I analyze them one by one. This is necessary for this type of research based on the 2026 methodology. And thanks to the WBA, we have a very nice methodology, very detailed one, where we have the explanation for each of indicators. So I would say that this actually simplifies the analysis a lot. And then for the second question about the expansion of the state role in the assessment, in particular, for example, for the requirement for the companies to report on their gender equality practices and developments, I think for sure that would be a very nice idea, although I do not see the potential for its realization in the wartime. So I do hope that in the future, in the long term, it would be possible, but not now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And actually, I have a follow-up question to Sofía. Do you know examples when the benchmark was already used by government, or it's still more non-state initiative? Are there any?
So I would say it's less about the benchmark itself being used by governments and more about the information that comes from the benchmark informing policy, right? So saying, so for example, even for, well, this is really not the best example given where we're at, but the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, we actually fed a lot of data on what companies were doing and were not doing, and around due diligence, around stakeholder engagement, to show where the gaps are. And we're seeing, for example, trends across the years. So we're seeing that companies are doing more to a certain stage, but then they stop, and that's where legislation is needed. So in the end, I think I would say we have seen, I guess benchmarks can be used in that sense in many ways, but at least two in policy. One is what I'm saying then, where the showcases of both the gaps, but also, again, what's doable. The fact that companies are doing this, because sometimes governments say, no one will ever do this. And if you come and say, actually, this and this and this company in your jurisdiction already take leading practice. So it's not such a crazy thing to say that you could be asking this of companies. And that would actually help you as a government achieve your own goals of gender equality, of human rights, of social development. So that's one way of saying it. It's possible, because this is where things are. But there's gaps here. This is where you need some state help and kind of government action help. That's one way. And the other one is definitely kind of informing any kind of reporting or standard like legislation or guidance. That could look many different ways in different countries. So again, maybe in some places we have tried to fit into some conversations about the European standards, but for example, in Japan, we try to more fit into kind of some voluntary guidelines that the government put for governments that are actually not, it's not law, it's more the government saying, this is what good looks like. we would like to see it. We're not going to make it mandatory, but it's still already kind of providing us some sense of where the direction is. And maybe one last thing to say is the reason I'm kind of putting this as a question to you and not for us is because, of course, the best placed people and organizations to know what the right time to advocate for these things and what the right angle. Like, are you asking for legislation? Are you asking for guidelines? Are you trying to advocate for the best practice case or for the gaps? Of course, you will be the ones to know what's the smartest way to do it. But I think in the end, basically the idea that there's evidence that is not like a question mark and kind of like, oh, who knows what companies are doing, or companies are doing great because we have this vibe and sense that they're doing great, but you actually have evidence. That really helps policy conversation. I think policymakers really like to have evidence to support then the things they're putting forward. So that's, I think, where we try to bring some of our data and our methodologies into the policy conversation.
Thank you so much, Sofia, for the response. And Katerina, did you have additional question?
Kind of follow up to the response of Snizhana regarding her statements. Actually, I would recommend you to take a look in interplay of law and sociology, because there are a lot of studies which claim that, at least in Switzerland, that females' participation significantly decreased. I don't remember a precise number, but for some dozen % as soon as they have a child, because of these family duties. And some connecting issue, most of refugees here are females from Ukraine, not like male gender, and they face with a lot of challenges with employment, just because not of bad companies who doesn't follow business and human rights approaches and so on and so forth, but just because they don't have capacities to manage a child and a work. So, and this is a country with one of the best worldwide maybe work and life balances. So in case we have difficulties here, probably they would be fair also for Ukraine, and it makes sense to think not only from companies' perspective, but also from the perspective of sociology, why do we have these issues and how to deal with them and how to bear those challenges, and to be objectively not only because of bad company policy, but yeah, also from this perspective.
Thank you so much, Katerina. Yeah, just to share, not representative at all consideration on one of the last events I attended, we were seeing the program, and in the program there were also like PhD presenters, but also more senior discussants, and all the men were professors and all the women were just doctors or PhDs, and they were all the same age. And when we just talking about that with colleagues, they told that at that department only men are holding professor's degree, also partly because women went to maternal leave, and then they were not able to so actively publish as their male colleagues. But it's just not representative at all. It's just a recent consideration.
But there are a lot of representative studies by sociologists in this area with very nice statistics by different countries.
Thank you, Katerina. Does anyone want to reflect or comment or raise question still? Yeah, if no, we are really great on time with all the discussion and presentations. We are really grateful to our presenters and discussants and all the audience for participating in our fourth webinar of our marathon, spring marathon of BHR webinars. And we still have one more to come on Wednesday, and everyone is very welcome to join us this Wednesday, and we will discuss platform workers and their rights, also with Katerina and other outstanding speakers. So you are very welcome to participate and join us in our final webinar on business and human rights. Thank you very much.